Hey guys, it's Shama here for another episode of Retailing Weekly. We have so many fun and exciting things to talk about. Really, one of the most interesting and important phenomenons that's happening right now is what's going on with online retailer and marketplace Farfetch. Now, for those of you guys who are not familiar with Farfetch, they have really busted out on the scene as the luxury selling destination. And what's so amazing about this is while we see the majority of sales for luxury brands really happening through brick and mortar stores, Farfetch has really come out the gate with really an amazing new concept, really driving a lot of technology. And it's starting to experiment a lot more with how luxury can really be improved in terms of the customer experience. Now, they've been popping up all over the place in the news. They popped up earlier this year as they launched and started talking about their store of the future. And that was really like middle of last year, Farfetchd OS. Basically, it is an operating system that allows them to start to experiment with a lot of different kinds of technologies within a brick and mortar storefront. So the kinds of technologies that they're integrating into the brick and mortar have to do things with RFID. So that is making sure that they can see and track products as they walk through the store, being able to do a lot of universal logins. So when a customer walks into the store, they are recognized by their technology. The ability for them to create and browse a wish list online, have that be translatable through a brick and mortar store. And then they're also doing mobile payment experiences similar to what Apple Pay has. So what's really fascinating here is that the beta concept store, which launched in Q3, Q4 of last year, was really based around kind of experimentation around in-store and digital technologies. And this has been something that I think is so fascinating and amazing because having a brick and mortar store, I do believe, is really one of the best advantageous opportunities that a retailer and a brand has because of all these different kinds of experimentation capacities, right? Otherwise it becomes daunting to be able to find a flagship or reopen or open up a new store. So being able to really establish early on as a brand, hey, we have a hub for experimentation, I think really is super, super exciting. So what's interesting is the concept store launched in London-based boutique Browns, which Farfetch acquired in 2015. And Tom Brown, which joined the Farfetch platform, is deploying this technology in its New York flagship. So it looks like this fall commercial rollout is really slated to happen this year, but they're not quite sure exactly what the business model is. And so what I think is fascinating here is we need to ask ourselves, does there need to be a clearly defined business model as we foray into new technologies? Are we starting to think about the customer from an experiential side and starting to see a much longer term impression that they have with the brands that are enacting and doing these really amazing types of activations with tech? Right? So maybe what I'm saying here is maybe the customer says, wow, I want to go into the Tom Brown store now, not only because I want to have that luxury experience and buy the product, but I also now want to go there over somewhere else because I want to see how their technologies are actually benefiting me as the consumer. Now, I think that's really important because sometimes technology, while it may not have such a bottom line driven ROI on the transaction, it might lead to a better and longer customer lifetime value, a better relationship, and it might be the ultimating factor that says, hey, I want to work with Tom Brown, or let's say anyone else who's employing these technologies in their store versus someone else because my shopping experience is faster. I have a better idea of what it is that I'm looking for and what I want. And the sales associates can help me. So when you think about an in-store relationship or transaction, it's really a two-way communication between whoever's in store, if there is some new technology that's integrating, and then also the consumer. And what's fascinating is, when you have a sales associate that is really largely educated and has that experience of knowing the customer better, what does that then allow you to do? Well, it allows you to be more informed with who your customer is. It allows you to be able to make better suggestions. It allows you to be able to be more integrated into their lives. And to be honest, the better AI systems that are being integrated into technologies on e-commerce platforms that allow better suggestive selling, that allow better suggestive brands, etc. Try this, you're purchasing this item, you bought this last time. Let's show you some new items on your homepage that are more suggestive to your particular buying habit. these are ways in which technology on e-com is already taking advantage of this, right? And we're seeing it more and more. We're seeing conversions increase on e-com. However, in store, guys, that is a huge opportunity, right? So anyway, Farfetch has been all over the place. Farfetch has been poised as a unicorn that's set to IPO later this year in 2018. They've received an investment from Chanel, which is really interesting because Chanel is also interested in adopting some of these technologies that they are starting to roll out with. So while Chanel is not planning on selling quilted bags on their website anytime soon, or integrating with the Farfetch platform anytime soon, they are interested in starting to roll out that Farfetch OS operating system technology into their brick and mortar stores. So we're seeing a lot in the news lately where there are some really great collaborations that are starting to roll out with other different retail brands. And so I think it'll be great to see how Chanel, one of the high-end, retail luxury brands, ends up rolling out this mix between, technology, AI, and how their consumers are going to react to it. And to be honest, I think it's a really great integration. I expect to see brands like Gucci starting to roll out with more integrations in store, as well as companies like Hermes as they start to really pivot and say, hey, technology and AI and the way things are going is not necessarily just for millennials. It's not just for younger generations. That really, this is a multi-gen opportunity. And a lot of the early adopters that also are buying into new technologies are brand followers of these luxury brands. So I think that's really fascinating to see how that ends up rolling out. Now, what's also interesting, as we start to think about the different positionings that Farfetch has been doing, right? Who they've been collaborating with, how they've been able to really get a foothold in this transitional space, right? E-com, now we're looking into brick and mortar technologies. It comes as no surprise that people like Natalie Massenet from Net-a-Porter joined the company in 2017 as a non-executive co-chairman. It's no surprise that we're now starting to see amazing partnerships and collabs roll out. So for example, Farfetch launched a 90-minute delivery service with Gucci, right? Which is really incredible, right? To be able to have something delivered in 90 minutes. They're also having great collaborations with Condé Nast and in China with JD.com, which is China's second largest e-commerce player. So this is an article on a thread that's been really closely followed by Business of Fashion and Women's Wear Daily. I think what we're going to find here is even as Farfetch continues to be the primary go-to collaborator, right? I think what's going to be even more important is how they can develop more and more primary technologies that they can then sell and license out to a lot of these different high-end fashion retailers. And that's really a segment that a lot of technologists have been interested in playing with because there's so much opportunity here to dream. Now, I don't know if you guys watched Burberry's show, but it's Christopher Bailey's last show. He's been with the company since 2001, really helped to scale and grow the business. Really exciting, really amazing stuff happened with the company. And it was with this final show that Farfetch was able to do a buy now, see now collab with Burberry. In essence, everything that you saw on the show was then available for purchase online. The concept was called Show to Door, and this program allowed you to buy something from the runway and within the first 24 hours be delivered. And so what's amazing here is that being able to order these capsule collections directly from the runway, being able to buy the exclusive, they had an LGBTQ rights selection, like a product line that they were really designing to support that, from the trench coats and also some exclusive bags. So what's really awesome, guys, is we're seeing Farfetch really steep itself into a lot of the bigger headlines that's happening, and they're driving it from a tech standpoint. So, we think about companies like Farfetch as a place to shop, as a place of curation, but it's really now time to say, what are they poised to be? Are they really poised to be the next level of e-com in-store OS operating systems for these luxury brands? And I think that that's really amazing. And I think it's really exciting because no one else yet has been able to really bridge that gap. And so I'm super, super excited. The other thing that's really interesting here is, of the people who work at Farfetch, there's about 1,000 engineers, right? And so when we think about the number of engineers that are dedicated to this, and then you take a look at the regular brick and mortar stores, right? You take a look at the Macy's, you take a look at even the Nordstroms, and you ask yourself, yes, they're employing experiential, yes, they're employing little bits of AI when they can, but are they really actually making investment towards technology? And are they partnering with tech companies to be able to drive this? So I imagine that once we see Farfetch kind of roll out with a little bit more of stronger bandwidth, they're doing more with a lot of these brands. I wonder if it's going to be Farfetch or a secondary tech group that's going to launch with technologies that really help to integrate and drive the customer experience at stores like Nordstrom's, or that they become technologies that companies like Macy's go to when they are actually looking to launch their new programs. Now, what I think is really fascinating here is when we think about companies like Macy's that are launching their new, the markets, and they're trying to get other brands to be involved. Again, it's not just creating the space, but it's what is the data and the information that you can really provide to brands as you start to work with them more collaboratively, right? Not just the space, but the rest of the data. Okay, so talking about Burberry, talking about kind of things coming out of London Fashion Week. What I think is also really fascinating is this new trend. And there's been this amazing new trend that a lot of designers have been starting to look at. It really kind of starting with vêtements, but really the new concept, guys, is seasonless product, right? And this is something that I feel like we've been talking about for a long time, right? We're tossing out calendars, we're looking to seasonless dressing. What does that actually mean for runway shows? What does that mean for fashion? How do we actually create products that fall in alignment with when consumers want them? And so this is an important concept because, guys, while we might be moving towards capsule collections and drop dates, etc., we are still working with cycles, and we still need to align with a lot of the retail stores and a lot of the buyers. So that means that as the calendars change, we still need to be mindful of the existing retail calendars, because those retail calendars are really important for you to then sync up your delivery deadlines. It's important to understand, even looking from a geolocation like specific standpoint, what are we looking at from a calendar wise in terms of Southern Hemisphere, Northern Hemisphere? What's the temperature like in Tokyo versus how things can be selling in Australia versus California, possibly New York? So as we start to think about, trends, and as we start to think about buying trends as opposed to fashion trends, it's important to say and understand that while brands like JW Anderson are working more towards getting rid of seasons, more towards delivery drops, Gucci is also making that segue towards delivery drops, as well as a lot of the other bigger fashion brands. Certainly Vetements really kind of spearheaded this idea of let's just drop product. Let's no longer just worry about if it's fall, winter, or spring, summer. What becomes important is we need to think about how we are pushing that out towards the retail partnerships with brands. So ultimately, guys, the biggest goal here is to be able to get something that is great for the consumer, right? Meaning we want to be able to have newness and freshness for the consumer. So does this mean on the brand standpoint that we are now forced to be able to deliver, right, sweaters when it's cold in sweaters when it's cold in South America, sweaters when it's cold in North America, right? And be able to transitionally sell to those two different markets. But then what does that mean, right, when it comes to e-commerce, right? How do we start to develop what that cadence looks like? And here's what I think. I think that we're going to start to see more item-driven specific brands that are going to really have a huge foray into the market. Companies that are really focused on things like sweaters, right, or focused like Canada Goose, for example, focused on making amazing jackets, right? They really become great examples of brands that can thrive no matter where they are selling in the world, because it is very climate dependent, not necessarily seasonal dependent, based on what we think in the Northern Hemisphere, right? So what we're thinking is fall, winter in London, in New York, in Paris, etc. So what's important, guys, is that we start to take a look at not just these drops, which, to be honest, it's where things are headed everywhere, but we start to take a look from a merchandising standpoint as how brands can now start to work with these new ways of doing deliveries, right? How is it that you're going to be approaching lifestyle? How is it you're going to be approaching distribution, right? When you are looking to do, let's say, heavier sweaters and more winter weight stuff right now as we're selling for fall winter, or as you're starting to develop your spring summer collections. Now, some brands have really gotten it right when they start to develop these very pared down and, niche collections, right? Meaning they drop one collection a year. We're starting to see brands that just do layerables. We're starting to see brands that are starting to, develop their own business models as far as how they want brands to be how they want to communicate with their consumers and how they want their brands to be perceived. So I think it opens up a whole can of worms. I think that at the end of the day, what it comes down to is that manufacturers at the very back end need to be able to know when they're producing. So as we start to see brands that are filling in the gaps between, right, traditional seasonal drops, you will start to see manufacturers being able to stay busier longer, which means we might also start to see manufacturers that are really being more specific about the brands they work with, right? We work with this brand, we're able to produce for them all year round, as opposed to having these little gaps in their production timelines that they can then take on some of these smaller brands. So guys, it's like the wild, wild west right now from a technology standpoint as we move into things like Farfetch and we start to understand what technology means for a lot of these new stores. And it's also the wild, wild west as we take a look at delivery dates, feeding to the consumer what they want, and being able to have actually a business model that is not only great for the brand and for the creative director and for what they want to stand for, but also really important, valuable for the consumer. All right, guys, one final interesting piece of news that I want to rip from the headlines, which I think is really valuable, is something from Racked. And so I'm taking a look at Racked here. Racked came out with a really fascinating article that had to do with Facebook buy-sell trade groups. Now, I don't know if you guys are familiar with these buy-sell trade groups. In fact, I had never really heard of them before. I knew that they existed, but I did not understand that some of these buy-sell trade groups can have hundreds of thousands of members. Now, what is a buy-sell trade group? Well, a buy-sell trade group is, in essence, a space where you have a bunch of different rules about what it is you can sell and not sell, but it's a place for people to sell their goods that is not on eBay and that is not on PoshMark. Now you might be asking yourself, well, why wouldn't I go to PoshMark or eBay? And a lot of that has to do with the fees. And so people who are selling $10 items don't want to be hit with a $5 fee. It just simply doesn't make sense for business. So brands are now starting their own, and sometimes ModCloth will jump in there, but brands now have their own dedicated buy, sell trade spaces. And what I think is really fascinating is they're not always spearheaded by these brands, but they are pretty brand specific. So you'll see like Louis Vuitton has a buy trade group. You'll see Beholden from Anthropologie has a big one that Racked ends up talking about. And what's really interesting here is that these buy sell groups are becoming a major marketplace. They're becoming a huge underground groundswell of where a lot of buyers are going to purchase product and to buy things at a discount, and where sellers are going to get rid of stuff in their closet, make a couple $1,000s and not have to worry about so many of the fees. So whether or not this is going to make a big difference for companies like eBay or PoshMark, I don't think so, right? To be on a buy sell group on Facebook, you've got to be really dedicated. You've got to be able to keep up with the rules. You have to be scouring it. It's not as if you're going to get any alerts. It's not as if, you're going to be able to see when that new item pops on Facebook that you want to buy. But it is a really amazing way of being able to take advantage of the Facebook Marketplace feature. And I think it's great for people who are really dedicated to being able to sell their goods on there and someone who's really willing to hunt for something. Now, what's great on Poshmark is Poshmark has authentication, right? They have ways of being able to make sure that what you're buying is legit, so you don't end up buying a product that is fake. Does Facebook have those same rules? Well, certainly if you end up selling something that's counterfeit on there, they will penalize you, right? Meaning people of the group will get rid of your profile, you'll be kicked out. But what kind of recourse is someone who is purchasing something that ends up being counterfeit? Not a whole lot. So I think while we see these groups that end up doing quite well as far as some of the lower price point goods. I think it would be really interesting to keep our eye on this marketplace for some of the luxury price point brands. All right, guys, that is all for me. Have an amazing